All right, hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are getting back on track, I figured I would keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. And because it's that time of year when the ghouls come out for All Hallows Eve and sometimes stretching way out into the reaches of the cosmos, we'll be taking our annual Fright Night journey into Spooky Stories 5, Sci-Fi Horror. On our panel tonight is my pal and the absolute queen of awesome, Linda D Addison. Linda is an award-winning author of horror, science fiction, fantasy, and poetry, including her collection, How to Recognize a Demon Has Become Your Friend, the author of more than 360 poems, stories, and articles. Linda is the recipient of the Writers Association Lifetime Achievement Award, HWA Mentor of the Year, and a science fiction and fantasy poetry Grand Master. Welcome back, Linda.
Hey.
All right.
Happy to be here.
All right. Good to see. There we go. All right. Also on our panel is my brother from another mother and partner in murdery crime fiction, Sawney Hatton. Sawney is an author, editor, and screenwriter whose credits include the dark comedy novel Dead Size, the YA noir novella Uglyville, the satanic panic novella The Devil's Delinquents, and his dark fiction short story collection Everyone is a Moon. He also edited the sci-fi horror anthology What Has Two Heads, Ten Eyes, and Terrifying Table Manners. Welcome, Sawney.
Good to be here. Thank you.
All right. And rounding out our panel is the incomparable Jonathan Maberry. Jonathan is a New York Times bestselling author who has won the Bram Stoker Award 5 times and has written horror, sci-fi, epic fantasy, and mystery with his book, short stories, comic books, and more, having been sold to more than 30 countries for adults, middle grade, and young adult, including original and tie-in fiction. Welcome back, Jonathan.
Hey, happy to be back.
All right. Good to see you. All right. Just a heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send notes or questions you have for me or the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. Now, as is our annual Halloween tradition, we're doing a spooky stories panel tonight focusing on sci-fi horror. But the term sci-fi horror covers a lot of territory, and we're going to do our best to dig into it as much of it as we can. So when I think about sci-fi horror, the first thing, and not the only thing, but the first thing that comes to mind is more about gory monsters from space. In particular, I'm thinking about Alien, The Thing, Predator. Focusing on just those kinds of stories for now. What is it about gory monsters that exist in outer space or are from outer space that give them an extra edge that kind of just gets under our skin? Jonathan, what do you think?
Well, the thing about gory monsters in space is that we're trying to get off planet. We're trying to get out there. And, our hope is that if there's nothing out there, then we get to exploit, and get to expand culture and so on. But if there is something out there and it's nasty, we have no skills, no preparation for that. So it's that extra fear of the unknown, kind of like we have when we're thinking about, going to the deepest parts of the ocean. Those monsters, if they're out there, we will know nothing about them, and the learning curve for to figure out how to fight them could be pretty extreme. So I like that unknown quality that shows up in so many of the great works, from going back to Colin Capp's Space Vampires with Made of the Life Force, Event Horizon, and so many others where the monsters.
Yeah, we're going to talk about more of that stuff later,
yeah.
but so for you, you're saying sort of one of the edges is sort of it's we don't know when we go out there, we don't know what we don't know, and because we don't know what we don't know, there's no way to prepare for it, and as such, we're at such a critical disadvantage. So, Sawney, what do you think? I know you're a big fan. What's the extra edge factor that comes from these kind of grotesque to us, these grotesque beasts that are either in space or come from space?
Well, I'm a monster freak and always have been a monster freak. As far as aliens and even things that are not necessarily from space, but from maybe the inner Earth or what have you, I've always been fascinated with them, going way back to watching Godzilla and King Kong marathons, and that naturally segued into just eating up anything that had a monster in it. And the world of when you talk about aliens and those grotesque creatures, there's a fascination to them. Humans, as John was saying, we're stupidly curious creatures. and we don't always know what's best for us. And yes, we like to go out into the farthest reaches of the unknown, only to uncover sometimes things that we were best left uncovering. And that's what's it. I think it's great. I think it's terrifying. It's great to discover new things, but that terrifying angle I find so scintillating. Just the perchance finding something, and once again in fiction, finding something that might eviscerate us in all horrible ways.
So, Linda, what about you? So, I mean, we've got these, there's the unknown, there's the curiosity that killed the cat, there's, the unprepared sensation of it, but there's also a real physicality to these kind of creatures that, I don't care who you are. I mean, you could be as trained as you want, but if you see something that's, 9 feet tall with giant fangs and can move in ways that you can't comprehend, like what is that experience for you, either from as a writer or as whether you read it or watch it, like what is that, again, these specific kinds of really lethal, dangerous, grotesque monsters way out of our comfort zone?
I have always loved that concept. I started off like mad for science fiction. And then when I discovered monsters in space, I was like, I'm in. So I think a part of it is that if the monster's here, you hope you can run from them. You can get in a car and go from them. But there, you're locked in. Like you go outside without the right oxygen, you're gone. You're an ice cube. So I think the idea that it is even more suffocating fear that you can't go outside of whatever ship you're on. If you're on a planet, going out into the planet itself from safe zone. So it adds a whole nother level of not safe. And I like it.
Yeah, I would even add, for those who, if you haven't either read the books or watched the series, there's a real sci-fi horror component to The Expanse. And I will give, for anyone who hasn't, and I don't want to spoil it if you haven't, but there are alien beings that infiltrate our characters' storyline, and talk about, not knowing what you don't know and what that can lead to is really kind of spectacularly disturbing and fascinating. And I wonder if that's the issue, or and this extends more than just to sci-fi horror, but we'll kind of keep it for here. Is that kind of the element that, that other layer of where the fear comes from, because it's on the edge of what is possible, for every possible, let's call it a positive experience, there could be an equal and opposite horrifying experience. And is there sort of that tantalizing possibility of this could be really great, or, oh God, this could be really bad. Should I just go home? I mean, we always know, like you hear the creepy thing, you should just leave. You should, but you never do. All right. So let's talk about this for a second. So what about tales involving genetic experimentation or surgeries like The Fly, Reanimator, The Island of Dr. Moreau, or even RoboCop for that matter, where body mutations are critical to the horror? Is it just about the physicality, or is there more going on there? I want to talk to me a little about kind of these genetic manipulations that are done through some sort of scientific, either experimentation or accident. So Linda, what do you think?
Well, I mean, The Fly, when I first saw that movie, I'm a geek, like a nerd geek. Like I love science, DNA, all that stuff growing up my whole life, even quantum. So that one, I was living for the other side of it after he came out of the thing, like, okay, so the idea of mixing concepts, like the first time someone said in a class, if an ant was our size, they could pick up a car with that one hand, and because of the difference in the way the muscles would work, the thought, the hunger would be different, what they want and what they need. So I think it's just so fascinating in a way, because now all of a sudden you think you know what a human does, but now if you do this mix in with it, what are you getting? Like RoboCop kind of tried to sell that he's still human, but they have movies that have come out. I can't remember the name of this one that I'm thinking of, where they created a life, an AI, and it acted human, but it really had like, didn't care if it killed somebody, if that's what it needed to do its thing. There was no sense of that there. So I think the expectation of what we think will happen, and then the DNA mix, the weirdness that comes in, and it just, Ex Machina is the movie.
Yes, great movie, actually. Yes.
Right. I had a long discussion with my sister after we watched that about what real AI is. Let's not go there because what we're no. But anyway.
so and I'll just say it just as an aside. So you've been mentioning The Fly. The Fly was the first rated R movie that I snuck into by myself. I was about, I don't know, 14 or so, and didn't really know what I was getting into, but God, was that gory and wonderfully horrifying. So Jonathan, what about you? Talking specifically about stories like The Island of Dr. Moreau, The Fly, Reanimator, where accident or genetic mutation, where this scientific infiltration of, let's sort of, our own DNA creates havoc. What is it about stories like that appeals, or what's the draw to them?
Well, part of the problem with those types of stories in terms of comfortable watching or reading is we as a species are not comfortable with any real variation ourselves. I mean, after all this time, we haven't even figured out how to get along with different races, let alone something where the person is going beyond any definition of normal. They become the other, and we don't know how to deal with the other, whether it's a zombie, whether it's somebody taken over by a demon or an alien or whatever, whether they're genetically modified. When they stop being us, we don't know how to react to them. And it's a frightening space for us because we're not prepared for it. We're not, as much as it hurts to say it, we're not a particularly open-minded species. We look for, like, we idolize the versions of ourselves that are, beautiful or handsome or whatever, or strong or, athletic, whatever. But when somebody is different, if go into a room with people who have done extensive body modifications, it's very difficult for the average person to feel comfortable. They feel alien, and they feel alienated from that person. So we're not comfortable with the other. And those stories put the other front and center. And it triggers that atavistic fear of, it's not us, it's them.
Right. Sawney, what about you? I mean, I know we've
that's a hard answer that's a hard one to follow up there. I mean, I'm fascinated with the things that can go bad with the human body. And, when we're talking about the Cronenbergian,
right,
sci-fi body horror, the fascination with that is watching how someone can transform to truly something monstrous, and whether they're a good monster or a bad monster doesn't matter.
Oh, like Videodrome just popped into my head, right?
Yep. So it's I've always, when I watch it, like a movie like The Fly, the Cronenberg version, which just went balls to the wall with all things grotesque and just changing in the most horrible, disgusting ways possible. But it's something strangely, it's horrifying, but at the same time, it's strangely fascinating to watch what happens to a body when some sort of mutation or something is changed about it, so that it becomes no longer human, or maybe just barely human. And it's something that I think people, we hope it doesn't happen to ourselves. That's the horror part of it, but we're also fascinated watching it to happen to someone else.
So that's kind of my question. I just want to probe a little bit deeper. So for some people, whether you're reading it, watching it, whatever, the idea of this sort of, scientific body horror is they just can't tolerate it. But for those who do find it fascinating, we can say that we find it fascinating. My question is, what's fascinating about it?
Well, it's it's hard to say because it's a very subjective thing. I think it's one of those things where you're either into it or you're not. I'm fascinated with watching the transformation process, even just going back to stuff like the Wolfman and stuff like that, where a human being is changing into something else. There is something fascinating about just the concept of it, and obviously when it's done well, It's visually stunning.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, I remember just as a kid, watching one of my favorite shows as a kid was watching, The Incredible Hulk. With Bill Bixby, and always the scene. Because the episode, when you look back on it, I mean, there really wasn't a lot going on there. The Hulk would show up at the beginning and then show up at the end. But whenever the music came on and his eyes turned white, right, and then he just started just to see that, I could skip the whole episode if I could just watch the moment where his eyes turn. There was just something about knowing that he was sort of transforming from what is recognizable to something more powerful, uncontrollable, right? There's so much power behind that metamorphosis. And I wonder if that's kind of what we're attracted to.
That's one of the things. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, Linda, please.
That's one of the things I was thinking when Sawney was talking, is there's a power that you're drawn to, even though you maybe can't have it. I mean, it's the same thing with being a vampire. Honestly, when I'm watching vampire movies, I'm like, I am the vampire. I want to be able to turn to smoke, go and, live forever at night. Okay, it has its downside, but not that. So I think
sure, you're dead, but whatever.
We'll be dead one day. So, there's the power and the extra, the having the extra. And to tie it in a teeny bit with what Jonathan was saying, is that being the other, you want to have something extra that you can just be like, no, I'm not going to go with that. I'm going to rip your head off and suck your blood out of your neck.
So, Jonathan, please.
Yeah, it's interesting with this transformation that goes on with when in some of the more complex and nuanced stories in this genre, what we have is something that appears normal, like in Ex Machina and Splice and a few other things where there's a created creature. That they usually present the version of it that appears normal in a way that looks beautiful, so that it triggers our reaction to our attraction to beauty. And then that it's not. And one of my favorite examples of this is a movie that's criminally underappreciated, The Girl with All the Gifts, based on Mike Carey's brilliant novel. You have the main character is this 12-year-old black girl from England, and she's adorable and she's smart and she's precocious and she's everything you like, but she's also a fungal-based zombie. And we keep seeing these moments where that part of her comes out, and it is truly terrifying because first of all, she's the star of the story. She's the person who they see as the one who can save them all, and yet her agenda is not a human agenda. Her agenda is an agenda based on her own unique physiology and her connection to others who are becoming like her, and that creates, fear. It creates conflict, terror, because again, what we're seeing is the beautiful person that we want to relate to, that we have related to, becoming something monstrous. And if you watch the movie, and please don't spoil it for anyone else, the ending's a killer. The ending's a real killer. It's not what you expect.
All right, fair enough. All right, so I want to take a step back for a minute and look at some other sci-fi horror. So let's talk about the Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, even some Doctor Who, even Frankenstein and the Invisible Man. So many of these tales deal with the ideas of isolation, loneliness, and mankind's inability to reconcile with elements it can't control. So talk to me a little bit about what those kind of tales, how they kind of fall under that, sci-fi horror kind of genre. I mean, not all of them do, but the ones that do really could fall in that space. So Sawney, what's your take on some of this kind of thing?
On a sort of isolated type of
I mean, you go back just as a classic, take your classic Twilight Zone out, right? Burgess Meredith, nuclear holocaust. All he wants to do is read books, breaks his glasses. He's literally the last man on earth.
Right.
With all the toys he could ever want, and he can't play with them until the day he dies alone in a nuclear holocaust.
And once again, there's something. It's almost like a human study when you put a person in a space where there's no one else around. They have no one else to interact with except maybe a dog if they're lucky. You're really watching a human almost lose their sense of humanity or trying to retain their sense of humanity. And it becomes increasingly difficult if you have no other humans to interact with. So that's, it's a terrifying prospect. If you picture yourself in a situation where there is no one else around in the world, whether it's a dystopian situation or what have you, or just in any kind of situation where you're not able to interact with anybody else, it's a terrifying prospect. Just recently, someone was telling me, not to get completely down here, but someone was saying that they had some sort of stroke or something like that, and the people around them actually thought that they had died, but they were still very much awake, but they could hear what was going on, but they could not interact. And I thought about how terrifying that is. They're surrounded by people who think that this is it, and meanwhile the person who's just they're not able to communicate. And that's the idea of not being able to communicate with someone, whether because they're not there or because you are unable to, I think is one of the most terrifying things a human being can ever have to go through.
So Linda, what about you again? And I'm not just specific to, a person who is isolated, just one person, but just stories of, so the Twilight Zone had many, classic, episodes where, some were sillier, some were more curious, but some were really drew on our deepest fears of what could come from out there or what could come to us. Same thing in Outer Limits. There are some Doctor Who episodes that are really quite scary. What do you think about, those, if we go back, at this point, 50, 60 years, a little longer, what those earlier ideas of what horror, or sci-fi horror were like and how they impacted you?
Well, the thing is that I was thinking while we're talking about this is death, to avoid death. When I first read Frankenstein and then saw the movies, the idea of creating life after death is so fascinating to people. And in the Twilight Zone world, the ones that just broke my heart were the ones that were like one of the ones mentioned with the guy surviving, all else being wiped out, and he's just sitting there. He's going to read books the rest of his life. He breaks his glasses. I literally cried the first time I saw that. I got tears in my eyes because and then the one with William Shatner in the plane. And nobody sees it. And then when he gets off, he realized at the end, the loneliness of seeing, but not no one else seeing to verify it. Are you going crazy? Is this real? Those kind of things really, really grab at my soul, and I like it.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. The idea when, it's sort of like the opposite of The Boy Who Cried Wolf. It's like you're calling attention to the real thing. And I don't want to get down a rabbit hole, but if you go back 6-7 years ago, I work in the real estate business, in the New York City real estate business. I told the world, Donald Trump is a bad dude. This is bad. I know how he does business. And I was shot down left, right, and center. No. What are you talking about? He's so successful. And it's just sort of like the more that I was trying to just alert people to react. I didn't know it'd be this bad. And no one listened. It was really it was horrible. Eventually they figured it out, but it was sort of too late. But anyway, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So Jonathan, what about you? Talk to me about the Outer Limits, Doctor Who, Twilight Zone,
Outer Limits was my favorite show growing up. I never missed the new episode, what was going on. And it did have a lot of stories that dealt with, again, the concept of the other, but also isolation. But I want to jump off the Outer Limits for a second. The story from, my childhood that really cemented the isolationist view was I Am Legend, the original novel. 1954. Richard Matheson gave me a copy of it for Christmas, 1972. And I have read that book every year. Most people have seen the movies and not read the book, which means they don't really get what the book's about, what the story's about.
Right.
He's the last guy on Earth. He thinks he is the last human being. And even though there are monsters around, and it's a vampire apocalypse book, there's no one like him left. And that isolation drives him slowly into despair and to insanity. It's a terrible story, and we see other stories about someone who was completely alone, and no one would survive being the last person on Earth. There'd be probably a couple of years and then suicide, because there's no hope left. You're not surviving for anything. So a lot of the apocalyptic stories, a lot of the zombie stories, Night of the Living Dead, which was inspired by the vampires in I Am Legend. Again, you have people isolated and they don't do well in isolation. They make bad choices, they make self-destructive choices. Right. So, with the Burgess Meredith episode of Twilight Zone, that's actually as much a story about what immortality would be like as anything else, because he feels he has world enough in time. But so what if he can't do anything fulfilling?
Right. Or the opposite. There was an early episode, remember, it was the guy who, I think he made a deal with the devil where he was a gambler and he could win, he could sell his soul, he could win at any gambling game.
Right.
And he was great. And after a while,
got boring.
He was so bored, and it just didn't matter. He could buy anything he wanted, he could have anything he wanted, and after a while, he's just like, this is it. There's nothing left for me. I'm literally, I have everything, and yet I have nothing.
I think there's a new interpretation of Dracula waiting to be written, where the reason he's evil is because he's gone insane from being alive for so long with no real peers, no end game, no no fulfillment. So he just goes nuts to create chaos, because at least chaos is interactive. Hell, I might write that.
There you go. So Linda, you look like you had something to say.
No, I'm already writing the poem. So
there you go. You see? Actually,
I'll include the poem in the book.
It was interesting, Jonathan. You were saying about how when you're in these stories where the isolation ultimately it leads to suicide, or at least the thoughts of it, because you feel like you have nothing to strive for. And I was thinking about, even though it's not exactly sci-fi, but what was the one with Tom Hanks when he was in the plane crash? He was on the island. Castaway, right? I mean, he's there for a couple of years, and ultimately he comes up with a thing to break his neck or whatever. And then it was only when he realized that the only thing to live for was to try to get off the island. Right. That was the only thing. Other than that, it was like, no one's ever going to find me, ever. It's either I die here or I take my shot. And that was the only thing that re-energized him. Otherwise, he was done. All right, so let's switch back a little bit. I want to continue along on these lines of isolation, and this is a little bit different. So stories and movies like Solaris, AI, Artificial Intelligence, and 2001: A Space Odyssey. All right, the last two, Kubrickian. Although I will say, though, that 2001, the book, is far more optimistic than the movie. They're tonally, couldn't be more different. But let's talk a little bit about this sort of existential dread of being in the cosmos. I mean, you are literally isolated from everyone, and there ain't no, it's not like, all right, you know what, I'm bored, let's go home. Like it don't work that way. Once the ship leaves, it's a one-way trip. So talk to me a little bit about, being out in the farthest regions of, the cosmos, and you were literally in a tin can, literally at the mercy of the ship, the computer, and whatever goes on between your ears. So, Jonathan, just follow that thread a bit.
Give yourself about 2 years of that, and you're going to open an airlock for a float. There have been stories that have touched on it. There was even a Twilight Zone story that touched on it, where a guy was on a prospect on a lonely planet, and he kept building female robots for company. And there was a great story by William F. Nolan, Miles to Go Before I Sleep, where a guy is going home. He, after having been in space for years and years, all he wants to do is live up to his promise to come home, but it's too far to go. He'll not live long enough to get there. So he creates a robot that looks exactly like him to fulfill a promise, but he's going to die out in space, which has a layer of sadness to it.
Yes.
A lot of casual readers overlook. And so many of the stories dealing with someone in extreme isolation, they are, Moon was another one, really, really great flick, where we see, I mean, the story is basically about psychological disintegration. And often the narrator of the story, the main character, is himself an unreliable narrator for that. He's telling the story he thinks he's living, but not the one he actually is. And Moon being a good example of that. We are social animals. We're not really bred for isolation. And deep space travel, unless you're taking a lot of people, I think is going to become a long distance, very expensive suicide run.
Linda, what about you? I mean, talk to me about things, 2001, being at the mercy of this, supercomputer, AI, artificial intelligence, where this poor kid, basically all he wants to do is, wants his mommy to love him, and he ends up at the literally at the bottom of the ocean forever. He's just two very different isolation, but in two very kind of, you could be isolated. Well, maybe the question I'm really going for, what is it worse or just different to be? You could be isolated physically, and you could be isolated, but yet you could be surrounded by people, yet be equally as isolated.
I don't think there's actually, I don't want to get into a social conversation here, but there's no difference if you're feeling isolated, right? If you're feeling like no one sees you, hears you, it doesn't matter what you say or think, you're less in some kind of way. And an AI movie, I am so obsessed with that one. I actually own it before it was like available easily on streaming, because it goes through these levels of this machine who becomes humanized in many ways, like becomes the thinking, feeling machine through its many stages that movie puts it through. And you also see how the humans are reacting in ways that are good and bad to that. And then the last big scene is just, I'm getting chills right now just remembering it, and I don't want to talk about it if no one's seen it, but the AI movie is literally like 3 movies in one. And transformation. So that one really, again, struck me so much, the idea of this AI being created to act like it loves, and then the transformations that happens even in the beginning when you still like it's still a machine, but it's created to love and obsess on one person. So when that person rejects them, the feeling, we feel rejected, we feel it even if it's just a machine reflecting it. So
right.
So
Sawney, what are your thoughts on these kinds of tales?
It's to piggyback off of what Jonathan was saying, the whole idea of doing a solo mission into the outer reaches of space, and we talked about how humans are naturally curious creatures and we want to discover new things and everything, but the very concept of doing that, who the hell would want to do that? Why would you want to? I mean, as you said, we are social beings, and even if you don't like people, even if you're just that's not who you are, you don't like dealing with people, not having any sort of social interaction, even seeing other people in the flesh, or just having buying coffee from someone, or having them just I don't know, just walk by them, it's such a horribly lonely existence. And even if you're going out there to discover new things and just new worlds and new creatures or whatever, without the connections, without having those connections to your fellow human being, I think that's awful. And hopefully, I mean, I'm assuming, well, we pretty much send robots out into space now to find things for us, which seems a lot wiser, rather than having someone go out there and within 2 years, probably, as you said, I think Jonathan's saying, going out the airlock because they just can't take it anymore.
All right, so Sawney, we're going to stick with you, and I want to sort of start tying kind of these themes together. So there are also tales that are more cosmic or interdimensional horror, such as as Jonathan, you mentioned earlier, Event Horizon, Sunshine, Stranger Things, or tales of HP Lovecraft, where demons, ghosts, or elements in the far reaches of space or are breaking through from other realms can drive us mad. What is it about? Talk to me a little bit about that very kind of specific kind of, maybe it's more cosmic or interdimensional horror.
Yeah, I mean, it's what's great about cosmic horror is that kind of anything goes. There's no real rules to it. You don't know what kind of effed up creature or whatever is going to come out at you. And And a lot of them, the common denominator is you have the scientist who wants to discover that other dimension and that other world, and it's playing God. And we all know if you play God enough times, eventually you're going to piss something off, and you're going to summon something that or discover something that's going to want to rip your head off, or turn you into something, mutate you in some way. So yeah, but it's great. You can, when you write a story, a cosmic horror story, literally you can do anything. You can create tons of new variations of horrible creatures that are just ready to drink your blood, eat your flesh, possess you, whatever they want to do.
All right, so Linda, along those lines, and while your points are taken, Sawney, so Linda, I want to dive let's go a little bit deeper than that. What do you think it is about, whether that's, Lovecraft or Stranger Things, Event Horizon, where these forces far beyond us from, like I said, either it's interdimensional, they're beasts, not just a creature, but we're talking about a force, of power, of strength, of size that's almost incalculable to us, to our understanding. What is it about that kind of horror that what's the draw to that specific kind of sci-fi or cosmic horror?
I think to some ways, and again, I hadn't really thought how to answer this, but I think to some ways it's like the shiny thing you can't look at. It's so much bigger, it's so much unknowable, and at the same time you can't ignore it. So the stories that it comes with, I literally wrote a story of a cosmic horror. It's in actually How to Recognize the Demon. It's called Future Past Imperfect. And I wanted to write a story, because I'm always doing something different, that involved American Indians and this cosmic horror setup. And I really, like, when I got to the point of their interaction with it, it's like LSD land. It's like you can't really write it. You kind of have to like blur the outlines of 3D in order to really make it something that someone would buy.
You're right. It's funny that you say that. Because I'm working on my new book now, and I was writing something this morning that is exactly what you're just saying. It's exactly what you just said. It's sort of blurring those lines of, it's like a cosmic, horrifying acid trip that it's very difficult to sort of, you're coming out of yourself while being in yourself. It's really odd.
I think it's fun to write, because for me it was fun to write because switching back and forth between 3D and this other place all happened on a screen. The main character would scream and suddenly they'd be back in normal 3D. Then they'd scream and they would be like in this other place that I put them, because that's my job.
All right, just a quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for the panel, put them in the chat box. We'll get to a few at the end. So Jonathan. So go ahead.
Yeah. I've been a big fan of cosmic horror my whole life. Grew up reading Lovecraft and so on. In fact, I have a deep space cosmic horror novel, Necrotech, coming out in May of next year. First of a new series. But one of the things I love about the cosmic horror setup is the grandeur, but also the disdain built into it. The way Lovecraft wrote about Cthulhu and the other monsters, they did not consider us in any of their actions. We are not the reason they do anything. We are a joke to them, or we are an accident, but we're in no way intended. And you have cults throughout the different stories written about the elder gods or the great old ones and so on, where you have cults built up. But even the deities they're praying to, or immortal beings that are so powerful they might as well be deities, they don't really care about the cults. They played with that a little bit in Ghostbusters too. They don't. These monsters are so big they don't care about us. And the analogy I think is a good one is, imagine that you're a stalk of rice, and that other stalks of rice around you have been taken and eaten, or just cut and destroyed, and it's a beetle or something else can flee but a stalk of rice needs to stay there. It is powerless because the scale of power between that thing and the thing that comes and takes it is so incalculable that it's a gulf that no growth on the part of the victim can ever cross it. There's no way to oppose it. You can't even get its attention to plead properly for it. And there is something wildly appealing about that, because in a lot of the stories, there is an attempt to understand it, which is our attempt to then communicate with it. But we can't, and those stories tend to end badly.
All right. So I want to jump to, I got one more question I want to get into while we can. So jump scares or not, the idea that, as you're saying, that a race of beings more powerful than we are coming to dominate our world has its own paranoia to them. Talk to me a little bit about alien invasion tales such as War of the Worlds, District 9, Signs, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where forces far beyond us have descended upon our world and we just don't know how to make heads or tails of it. So Jonathan, why don't you keep going?
All right, sure. So, I love those stories so much, and yet there is a bit of arrogance in their construction. We make Earth so important that aliens need to come across the gulfs of space to steal our resources, like and Battle
Right.
Los Angeles and a couple others. They're here to steal the water. Well, the problem is there's more water on asteroids in the asteroid belt and the Kuiper belt, 50 trillion times as much as is on Earth. And it's a lot easier to get than conquering a planet. So, but we create a sort of we matter, and therefore they have to come and steal
right.
so we can fight back. And, that arrogance also I get too, because I would want our planet to be, in fact, that important that they would come here, that they would come here to conquer. You could build a case for conquest within our solar system, Mars, War of the Worlds. We saw ourselves as the most advanced planet, but we didn't know the other planets were not populated. So yes, come, dying world, come to us, steal a living world. That story makes so much more sense. V makes no sense at all. And so Independence Day makes no sense at all. Mind you, they're entertaining as hell, but they make no sense because the effort to get here to conquer us demonstrates a level of technology so vast that how are they not solving their own problems in other ways? And yet those stories are so entertaining. I'll watch them every time.
That's right. So all right. So whether it's realistic or not for some giant alien race to decide they want to come here, in the ones where they do come here, what is it about these is it just the fear of being overtaken? Is it just paranoia? I mean, when Orson Welles first read this story on the air, people literally jumped out of windows. They thought this is it. We're done. It literally scared people actually to death. What is it about this sort of this sense of this ominous power? And it could be more insidious, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The end result is kind of the same. So Linda, what do you think?
Well, I think I hadn't thought of some of the things that Jonathan brought up. That's kind of actually.
You gotta suck the air out of the room, pal.
That's what he does. That's his job. Anyway, I was thinking a lot about Body Snatchers because I've seen every version of it. There's been a lot. And what I always found I can't look away from, even though I know them all by heart, is when the pod turns into the duplicate of the human, and all I can think is them opening their mouths and screaming or screeching, and they're, the way they communicate, the way they are. And I don't know what the overarching thing was, except like replicate and take over, which is kind of a colonization concept. I'm just saying, like just go in and take over. Doesn't matter how much sense it makes, but we're going to do this. So, Body Snatchers to me was always so fascinating because it's like, we can look like you, but we're totally different. And what are we here for? Just to duplicate, make as many of us as we can. And that's like scary.
Sawney, we were just actually talking about this not that long ago.
I believe so, yes. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of my all-time favorite movie stories. All the versions, the 1956 version by Don Siegel and Philip Kaufman's 78 version, and I think Abel Ferrara did a version. Anyway, there's been a bunch of them. I don't get scared easily by horror, frankly. There's very seldom do I see a horror film or read a book that really gets under my skin. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is one of the few that does get under my skin, mainly because it is so insidious. They're so clandestine when they come in, and they're just slowly taking people over. And once again, some people notice finally, but they're not. The people have not been changed. Don't listen. They don't believe them, and that's another thing we just talked about. The whole slow process of us being colonized, as Linda was saying, is absolutely a terrifying prospect. Versus, when you have an alien coming down, aliens coming down, they're shooting everybody and everything. I mean, that's all out war. Doesn't matter where, if we're having a war on Earth or having a war in space, from space, doesn't matter. But Invasion of the Body Snatchers, it was just so clever of a concept and so friggin' sinister.
All right, that was great. But now it's a time on the segment on the show where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories I created just for this event. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are: fly in my soup, milk and cookies, 2 space monsters walk into a bar, Spider-Man, the truth is out there, good fences, good neighbors, and Dear Cthulhu. All right, Jonathan, you're up first. Ready?
Okay.
All right, what do we got for you? You got 2 monsters walk into a bar. All right, so what do we got here? 2 space monsters walk into a bar. The first one says, hey, your xenomorph is showing. And the other one says...
Oh, geez. Your slime's dripping all over the floor.
All right, fair enough. Okay, that's what you got. All right, Linda, you're up next.
I'm scared.
All right, what do we got for you? All right, you got fly in my soup. All right, you're at a restaurant and find a fly in your soup, but not before you accidentally ingest it, not realizing it was part of a science experiment gone wrong. As a result, you start to mutate from the inside out to the point where your blood is replaced with the soup you ate. If you had to have soup for blood, what kind of soup would it be?
Pea soup?
Really?
Okay.
Pea soup?
Sure enough. That's what piece is that?
Going to be the sweetest.
That's what it is. It's the little chunks of ham that'll make it. That'll make
the little chunks of ham.
I've always said, and my grandmother used to tell me, Tatala, it's the little chunks of ham that make the blood. So there you go. All right, here we go. Sawney, this is you. All right, for you, we got... no, we saw that one. All right, Spider-Man. All right. All right, so you got Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. If that were the case, wherein Spider-Man was a true Spider-Man, what would be worse? Being Spider-Man with 8 legs, 8 eyes, or laying sacks with up to 250 spider eggs?
Of the 3, what's the worst?
Yes.
I'm going to go with the laying the 200 egg sacs, hands down. Yeah, I mean, that sounds painful, I would think.
Especially without a birth canal, I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, definitely.
If you had one, you wouldn't want to have to do that.
I think either way, it's going to be a rough go. All right, now it's a time where we're going to pick your poison. I've got 4 choices for you: A, B, C, or D. I'm not going to tell you what's behind each, but I will say they're all related to tonight's theme. All right, so Linda, you're up first. What do you got? A, B, C, or D?
D.
D. All right, advice column. All right, so what's the best advice you could offer our writers out there about crafting tales of sci-fi horror?
Read it a lot, and then pick sci-fi or horror and just like mush it up and do whatever the heck you dream like doing with it. That's all.
All right. Read what you're going to write. All right, fair enough. All right, Jonathan, you're up next. So that means you got A, B, or C?
B.
B. All right. Well, we touched upon this earlier that Linda didn't want to go there. So AI and you. As if HAL suddenly came online, a new system has been thrust upon us seemingly overnight, with AI sinking its digital teeth into the publishing world. What do you think about the impact that AI is having right now on the writing community and where it might lead?
Well, it's not hurting fiction too much, but it's really impacting scholarly works quite a lot. And the first thing I would do is invest in the growth industry of AI forensics, where they can backtrack the thing to the actual sources. I would get involved in that in a big way. I'm already involved in the class action suit against teaching AI to write based on novels, because 20 some of my novels were in that list.
Wow.
But yeah, I would. AI scares the hell out of me in publishing. It's going to do a lot of damage to academic writing, not so much to fiction.
Interesting. Just talk a little bit more about that.
Well, in fiction, the individual voice is harder to copy. Though I know publishers, I actually have had conversations with publishers who are looking forward to using AI programs to continue series by writers who died. And like right now, a bunch of my friends are getting hired to write those books, like the new Spencer novels or the new Tom Clancy. You know, buddies of mine are getting that gig. If they can just input all the Tom Clancy stuff and then, you know, add some current event stuff, technically the machine will chunk out one of those books, and novelists would lose jobs. But it's really hard to capture the human tone in fiction. In nonfiction, it's a collection of well-organized facts and some suppositions, which, right, though a computer can't generalize, it can certainly come up with inferences based on its learning software. So you can have how-to manuals, nonfiction books, even memoirs or biographies rather, that are generated by AI. I don't like it, but we're already seeing these things, coming to the publisher's house, and big debates going on within the house as to whether there's something they should invest in.
Right. And can I just say real quickly, the thing about it is, because I worked in computer programming for 50 years. So the thing about it is that AI doesn't know when it's lying. When it presents a line, even in nonfiction, it presents it as truth as much as a lie. So I don't really know how those books can be done without a knowledgeable human being going through them to confirm the truth, like some politicians you have to do. So the other thing is that I'm not scared of it, because, poetry, yeah, they're going to need a whole different kind of physical technology before it can write poetry that's not boring.
All right. Fair. Well, that's for sure. Let's hope it.
It's being used in the greeting card industry, though.
Yes. Sawney, so you got A or C?
Let's do A.
All right. Okay. So we are going to give you some truth serum. So we got 10 sci-fi horror questions. You ready? Favorite sci-fi horror tale?
Written or
whatever.
Let's. I'm gonna go Invasion by Body Snatchers.
Okay. Scariest sci-fi horror creature?
Oh, let's go with the xenomorph alien.
Twilight Zone or Stranger Things?
Twilight Zone.
Watching sci-fi horror, lights on or off?
Off.
Which is scarier, unleashing a cosmic monster onto the world or being trapped in close quarters with one?
Trapped in close quarters.
You wake up to discover your life is a lie. Which rattles you more, to learn you're living with a space monster in disguise, or that you are one?
Living with one.
Do you think there are alien races in the reaches of space who would try to annihilate or enslave us if they made it here?
Absolutely. Probably several of them.
Do you think aliens from other worlds actually live among us?
Ooh, maybe. I'm agnostic.
Do you think the government has secret facilities with alien technology?
Yes.
If you could keep an alien as a pet, as long as it didn't harm you or obeyed your commands, would you?
Yes. It was cute. It had to be cute. It has to be a cute animal.
Yeah. Well, Sawney's smirking because he wrote this great story called about a pet, about a sci-fi pet. So, all right. We got a couple of minutes, so we're going to take some questions for the audience. We got one from Eric Nunnally. What would the panel recommend for a sci-fi horror story involving the most subtle and terrifying antagonist?
Tooth Fairy's been done already, hasn't it? Easter Bunny?
I would go with the TV series Penny Dreadful, because it took all of the extreme actions of all the monsters and made them subtle and complex, and often, things that they were, not comfortable with in themselves. There's so much subtlety in that, so much realism in it, that it makes the story absolutely compelling and therefore more terrifying.
All right, fair enough. All right, guys, so we're running out of time, so I'm going to share my screen. We got some goodies to share, so hang on. All right, so we got this, and we got this. All right, Linda, my dear.
Hey.
What do we got here? Talk to me.
Well, How to Recognize a Demon has become your friend. It's a Palmer story, and it's psychological horror. And yeah, how do you not want to recognize a demon when they become your friend, or the other way around? So, I like to think of it as entertaining and instructional at the same time.
All right, see? All right, you see? A how-to tip while it's scaring your brains out. All right. So, Sawney, talk to me about this, because God knows I talked about it plenty enough last week.
Yeah. So the title actually came to me in a dream before I got all the stories together, and since it was in a dream, I can't change it. But it's an anthology of just what it says, science fiction horror, and it really covers the gamut of your Alien and The Thing and Event Horizon type stuff, all the way to stuff like Phantasm and Reanimator. I think it's a great collection, anthology of stories that really show what science fiction horror can be.
And you have an original story in there as well, correct?
I do. The aforementioned pet is in that one as well.
Oh, you did. Okay, fair enough. All right, so guys, if you're looking for gory, horrible sci-fi horror, well, I think the cover says it all. All right, Jonathan, what do we got going on?
So it's the 100th anniversary of Weird Tales. I'm the editor of Weird Tales, and this started out as an issue of the magazine and kind of grew as we did it. It has classic stuff, Cosmic Horror by HP Lovecraft, Robert E. Howard, and tons of others, plus brand new stuff. And among the brand new things, one of the things I wanted to show is the scope of what falls under the umbrella of weird. So we have a story by Laurel K. Hamilton, whose adult Anita Vampire series I'm not even old enough to read because it's really graphic. And in the same book, we have R.L. Stine. And both of them, are good friends of mine. And when I ask them both, they're like, oh, hell yes. It just shows the range of what falls under weird. It's beautifully illustrated. It's a hardcover release. There's also an audiobook, an ebook of it. And I've done 24 anthologies. This one is the one I'm most proud of as editor. Yep, there's Linda has a copy too. It's just such a wonderful project, and it's a great celebration for the oldest horror magazine in the world.
Wow, that's great. All right, guys, so pick that up. All right, as for me, since tonight's theme is sci-fi horror, I'm really excited to share with you the launch of my new book, Blunt Force Rising. It's the fourth novel in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private eye Angela Hardwick. In my mind, she is part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, and part Sarah Connor from Terminator. In Blunt Force Rising, Hardwick and her partner, Eric Whistler, are providing extra security on a Galaxy cruise ship, which you can see right there. For an AI robotics and cybernetics conference, which quickly devolves into a bitter argument between the pro-Android and anti-Android community. And for me, androids in this book are a surrogate for any marginalized group who seem to engender all sorts of hate for no apparent reason. Anyway, a murder takes place on board the cruise ship, and it sets off a chain of events, including a violent insurrection that will test lives, loyalties, and the very notion of humanity itself. This one is also a locked room mystery thriller. So if you're up for some close quarters mayhem and a lot of cosmic blood and gore, then this one is definitely for you. Blunt Force Rising, it's on sale now in ebook and paperback. And in the meantime, I will encourage you to check out the first three books in the series, Crackle and Fire, Fractured Lies, and Hot Ash. And I want to be clear to anyone that each novel in the series is a standalone adventure. I reintroduced the world building and the characters so you can jump in at any point and read them in any order. But there is character development throughout the series, so your mileage may vary on where you want to begin. Blunt Force Rising and the rest of the series is available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. All right, guys, that's our show. I want to thank my friends Linda and Sawney and Jonathan for coming out tonight to talk sci-fi horror for our annual Spooky Stories episode. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. This show would not be what it is if it wasn't for you. I hope you had a great time. And if you haven't already, be sure to follow me on social media and subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's all free. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro. And as always, be kind, be gentle, and generous of spirit, and go read a book. And I'll see you all next week. All right, guys, take care. It was great to see you. Thanks so much. Bye now.